Good evening, everyone. You're very welcome to the inaugural Festival of Writing and Ideas Book Club with me, Cormac Kinsella, and Colm Toibin. We've three more authors confirmed in the new year who will be appearing at the 2024 festival. Anne Enright will join us on January the 11th to discuss her latest book, The Wren, the Wren. And John Ronson will be here on January the 31st to discuss The Psychopath Test. And on March 11th, Elizabeth Strout will discuss her novel, Lucy by the Sea. We'll be announcing another 4 book club authors very soon, which will bring us to mid-May next year. But back to this evening. By way of introduction, Colm Toibin was born in Enniscorthy in 1955. He's the author of 11 novels, including The Master, Brooklyn, The Testament of Mary, Nora Webster, House of Names, and The Magician. His work has been shortlisted for the Booker Prize 3 times, has won the Costa Novel of the Year Award and the Impact Award. He has also published 2 collections of stories and many works of non-fiction. He is currently the laureate for Irish fiction. Tonight we're going to talk about Brooklyn, and please type in any questions in the comments on YouTube, and I'll try and read some of them if I can. We've chosen Brooklyn this evening as its sequel, Long Island, will be published by Picador Books next May. Brooklyn was published in 2009 and is set in Enniscorthy and Brooklyn in the 1950s. The main character, Eilish Lacey, is one among many of her generation who cannot find work at home. So when a job is offered in America, it is clear that she must go. Leaving her family and home, Eilish sets off to forge a new life for herself in Brooklyn. Young, homesick, and alone, she gradually buries the pain of parting beneath the rhythms of a new life. Days at the till in a large department store, night classes in Brooklyn College, and Friday evenings on the dance floor of the parish hall, until she realizes that she has found a sort of happiness. But when tragic news summons her back to Ireland, and the constrictions of her old life unexpectedly give way to new possibilities, she finds herself facing a terrible choice between love and happiness in the land where she belongs and the promises she must keep on the far side of the ocean. Colm, you're very welcome this evening.
Thank you very much, Colm. That was a beautiful introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Colm, Brooklyn comes in the middle of what now could be called a Wexford quintet. The Heather Blazing and the Blackwater Lightship preceded, and Nora Webster and the fairly soon Long Island. Was this in any way planned, or did each novel just kind of beget each other?
I think that when I'd finished The South, which is the first novel, which is mainly set in Spain, I sort of realized that from one particular chapter towards the end of The South, where they go back to Ireland and they end up back in Enniscorthy, back on the Wexford coast, that I could actually get something from the Wexford side of things. And I had other ideas for books, but just once I began The Heather Blazing, I realized that I was in a territory that was much more familiar to me. And I was in a place also with the sort of the fictional things the things you have to put into a novel like that I wouldn't have even dreamed of a decade earlier when I was planning novels. You know, the ordinary life of a domestic semi-detached house on the edge of a town, the sort of way the table is set, the fire lighting, the Christmas coming, the bad weather, the summer, all of that would have seemed to me that it wouldn't have yielded much, but it also really had been gone over and over by, its culmination would have been someone like John McGahern, and I didn't want to write that. And then I found myself doing so. And then I would each time, I mean, there was the particular one I remember, because often you just drift into a novel, is moving from the Blackwater Lightship, which is set on the Wexford coast in, I think, 1993, over 7 days with 6 characters, and with a lot of recrimination, nostalgia, rain, and family life, and tea being made. And
you left out the midges.
Right,
You left out the midges.
Oh, a lot of midges, and also a thing that people nowadays mightn't remember much, but fly paper hanging from the light bulb in the middle of the room, where the flies would stick to it, and you'd watch them slowly squirrel. And that's really, so the writing of the Henry James novel, The Master, was really a retaliation. It was done in reply almost to that. So it isn't as though there was a plan to write these books. It is that after each one, I didn't want any more of that. So I didn't want any more glamorous people after the Henry James book. So that I suppose the next thing coming after that really was Brooklyn. Yeah. And so it goes on. But it's not planned, but it does.
There is a thing that you have of moving to a foreign place. I mean, you went to Argentina and the Story of the Night, the Malvinas. So after the Heather Blazing.
That Yeah, I would move too. So and then I would move back to Ireland and then back again. So it's probably does that. There's I was in China and there's a whole new movement of young Chinese women who really, really read books and have questions to ask them about the books, in a way that maybe they couldn't ask questions about other areas. So at the back of a hall, this young woman stood up and said, "You have used the same character in the following books. It's in one novel, but then she appears in the next book as though somehow I had done something very wrong and stolen a character from somebody or from something." But that certainly with the new book with Long Island, it has Nora Webster makes, I think, one appearance. Lily Devereux, who's the Blackwater Lightship, she's in the book quite a bit. Her mother's in the book. It's even a reference to the judge from the Heather Blazing. And there's certainly a reference to one other character, so that there's a whole effort, but it's a pale effort, and I'm not sure how it's working. Just to keep that show on the road, to keep peopling the novels, especially with side characters that have appeared elsewhere.
And could we look back at Enniscorthy in the 1950s? Can you set the scene for us? I mean, you obviously don't remember the 1950s, but it would have been your parents' generation, I suppose, is who you were.
Yeah, I suppose that was the last generation where the emigration thing was still really serious. You tend to know about that because of an event that takes place in the middle of August in the town, which is called the Pattern, which is that everyone goes to the graves.
Yeah, I remember that.
2 days before, maybe cleaning the graves, and it's almost a festive occasion. Like it's not a grief-stricken grave occasion. It's much more than that, and people dress up in bright colors. It's the middle of August, but it's the time a lot of people choose to come home from England. Not as much now from America because that was a different generation. So you can see the missing person is home from England with perhaps their wife, perhaps their children. So there's a whole sense of completion being done on that day, and then people disperse and go back to where they were from. So you do get a sense not only of emigration being a very powerful thing, but the people coming back. And there was a very great difference between people who came back from America and people who came back from England. People who came back from England were often broken by the experience. They didn't boast about being in Birmingham or Bolton. They didn't say Birmingham. But people who were in
Pat McCabe explores that very well in The Butcher Boy. That character, the uncle, who comes back. Brian Friel actually did it as well. The Aristocrats. Brian Friel does a character.
And James Ryan has it in Home from England. So, but the idea of the returned Yank, which Brian Friel has in The Loves of Cass Maguire, like talking the big talk, and then Tom Murphy has it in Conversations on a Homecoming. Of they realize that all the money the fellow has who's home from America is his mother has been in the post office taking out a lot of money that very day.
Right.
They realize he doesn't have any of his money. It's his mother's money he's using in the pub. And it's that sort of idea of the distance between an ideal and the sort of tawdry reality that America is very hard. And so every family, I would think, in Enniscorthy in the 1950s lost someone.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if that's the word, because some people were, of course, delighted to get away. I mean, there was one fellow who went to, he really did just go to Liverpool for the weekend, and he never came home ever again.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was known, it was people saying, he went to, and it was, we were down at the Strand one Sunday. It would have been in the 60s when there was a man with us, was a brother of someone, and he disappeared, and I realized he'd gone up the hill, and someone said he didn't spend the afternoon with us. So right. He's home from Australia, and he probably won't ever come home again. So he just wants to be on his own for the afternoon.
Wow.
You go,
wow. Yeah.
So that sort of thing was there. It wasn't in the background. It was in the background for the winter. In the summer, it would become and there was another time where, fellows came home from England. They were the sons of somebody, and they had big English accents, and they were very physically very strong in some way that we weren't. I don't know, was their diet better, or did they go to did they have gymnastics in school or something? But in any case, they talked with an extraordinary confidence in this extraordinary English accent.
And then I presume the institutions were the pubs and the church, and they were the if you like, the town. That's where the town revolved around. Yeah,
and it was probably before women would dream of going into a pub.
Yeah,
like they wouldn't. And so, the cathedral, Enniscorthy Cathedral, would be filled. I mean, from 8 o'clock in the morning. We did a 7 o'clock mass, but really from 8 o'clock right through until 12 o'clock mass, packed people.
Yeah,
and that was very much part of the world.
Could we have a little short reading from just the start of the novel? It's great because it just introduced a few characters.
That evening, Ailish called at Nancy Burns at 9, aware that she had not made enough effort with her appearance. They're going to a dance.
Yeah.
She'd washed her hair and put on a summer dress, but she thought that she looked dowdy and was resigned to the idea that if Nancy danced more than one dance with George Sheridan, then she was going home on her own. She was glad that Rose, her sister, had not seen her before she left, as she would have made her do something more with her hair and put on some makeup and generally try to look smarter. Now, the rule is, Nancy said, that we are not even looking at George Sheridan, and he might be with a whole crowd from the rugby club or might not even be there at all. They often go to Courtown on a Sunday night, that crowd. So we are to be deep in conversation, and I'm not dancing with anyone else. So just in case he came and saw me. So if anyone is coming over to ask us to dance, we just stand up and go to the ladies. It was clear that Nancy, using help from her sister and her mother, with both of whom she had finally shared the news that she danced with George Sheridan the previous Sunday, had gone to a great deal of trouble. She'd had her hair done the day before. She was wearing a blue dress that Ailish had only seen once before. She was now applying makeup in front of the bathroom mirror as her mother and sister made their way in and out of the room, offering advice and commentary and admiration.
Right. Were you ever, for me, that's kind of essential. It's a really important paragraph of the book because it introduces all these people. And I think there's enough story in that nearly for a novel. I mean, there's a Jane Austen novel in that nearly, the way you've got the guy is being ignored, he's clearly interested. You have this great relationship between Nancy and Ailish. And was there ever a temptation just to build on that?
No, this was always to be there as background. Right. And the things to do was to put as much, just stick to the idea that Nancy and George are going to be together.
Yeah.
And that is not what's going to happen with Ailish. That in fact, when she goes into that same dance, Jim Farrell, who will later become an important protagonist of the book, ignores her. Now, if you look carefully at some of those sentences as ignoring her, I think one of them has a direct reference to Mr. Darcy in Pride and Prejudice, ignoring Help Me, ignoring not Anne Elliot. Anyway, ignoring the protagonist of Pride and Prejudice. And there's Catherine, there's Bennett, Elizabeth
Bennett.
That he ignores her at the dance when he meets her first. Darcy does,
right?
And that's exactly what Jim Farrell does. But I really had as I was writing one, I had the other beside me just to see. And it wasn't to learn anything from the Jane Austen because I knew enough about it already. Yeah. It was just to see if there was a little phrase I could slyly put in as a sort of little joke. So yes, I was aware that, but I didn't think it was enough that the romance between George and Nancy would not have enough in it.
Right. Yeah.
And that I mean, the Jane Austen might seem to be about domestic life or about about sensibility. But in fact, it's about a great change happening in England, where a girl who has no money can have enough intelligence, wit, and sort of natural education that she can be ready for a man with 10,000 a year, which might not have been the case a generation earlier. So you're talking about a sort of a social movement almost of educated young women in a time of relative peace in England would actually be able to make that move. There's almost a sense of genetics in it that she would bring with her, a sort of health that for example, the other sisters in the book, Darcy's own sister, and Miss Darcy, and also the women of Netherfield, that they don't have in the same way as especially the two oldest Bennett women have. So you're talking about something in Jane Austen that is actually tectonic, sort of. And I couldn't find that with Nancy, and so I had to do the next thing, which was send Ailish to America and see what happens to it there. Like you really, I felt you had to do something larger.
There's an amazing. What's really interesting in the book is that human cost and consequence is really important in the book, in the sense that Jim ignoring her that night nearly is part of what drives her away, because it's yet again another reason for her not to stay anywhere. And also the fact that she goes to Brooklyn means that her sister Rose won't ever be able to do anything else. And in many ways, Rose would be a much more natural fit. Eilish would be happy to stay in Enniscorthy. And is that just a human thing, or were you looking at that? Was it like, it's just fascinating how stark it is, that it's nearly Newtonian, that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, that anytime anyone does something, there's a consequence.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what is plot?
Yeah.
Plot is an event in a novel,
and
then its consequences.
Right.
So the event is not enough to give you plot. It's the consequences of the event.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I suppose I was thinking about, that idea I was talking about in Jane Austen of an important moment going on in the social life of the country that is being registered only in the domestic life of the novel.
Mm-hmm.
And that, she doesn't refer to the large questions, she keeps it small, but the implications are there, the resonance is there. That if you have a situation where there's a widow, and that widow is to be looked after until death by her daughter, and that then becomes a drama, which daughter?
Mm-hmm.
And what Rose does is she switches it, because it usually should be the younger daughter will look after the mother.
Right.
Rose switches that by sending Eilish to America. But when Rose dies, then the drama begins, because of course what she must do is come home from America to be with her mother.
Right. Yeah.
And so it isn't merely to come home from America to look for love, but that the other question, which is, written into the rules of those generations, of those houses, that is what happened when there was a widow. Her daughter looked after her.
Yeah.
And I mean, I could give you examples. And
I mean, the social rules are extraordinary.
So many aunts who didn't marry until later, or didn't marry at all, because they looked after the mother.
Yeah. So Brooklyn, I mean, the passage over is one of the greatest pieces. I'm going to spare our audience, though, the seasickness and all that. But I would like you to set the scene for us that Eilish has arrived in Brooklyn. She's been met by Father Flood, who's a friend of the family, and Rose, her sister, has arranged this. But it's a great piece about working in it's Bartocci's. Is it Bartocci's?
Bartocci's, yeah.
Bartocci's, the department store.
I got a letter from people at Bartocci, but it was just that I had an Italian translator called Maurizio Bartocci.
Yeah,
I thought it'd be good to put Maurizio's name into the book.
And
Maurizio thought it was good too.
Yeah,
but
of course.
That's how names get into books,
Right. Yeah.
In Bartocci's, she had to clock in, which was easy, and then go to her locker in the women's room downstairs and change into the blue uniform that girls on the shop floor had to wear. She was there most mornings before most of the other girls arrived. Some of them often did not appear until the last second. Miss Fortini, who was a supervisor, disapproved of this, Eilish knew. On her first day, Father Flood had taken her to the main office, and she'd had an interview with Elisabetta Bartocci. I should say Elisabetta was the name of my Italian publisher. So all these, the daughter of the owner, who she thought was the most perfectly dressed woman she'd ever seen. She wrote to her mother and Rose about Miss Bartocci's flaring red costume and white plain blouse, her red high heel shoes, her hair, which was shiny black and perfect. Her lipstick was bright red, and her eyes were the blackest Eilish had ever seen. That's a pretty good version of Elisabetta, my Italian publisher.
Right.
Brooklyn changes every day, Miss Bartocci said it as Father Flood nodded. New people arrive, and they could be Jewish or Irish or Polish or even colored. Our old customers are moving out to Long Island, and we can't follow them. So we need new customers every week. We treat everyone the same. We welcome every single person who comes into this store. They all have money to spend. We keep our prices low and our manners high. If people like it here, they'll come back. You treat the customer like a new friend. Is that a deal? Eilish nodded. You give them a big Irish smile.
Great. Fantastic. Your research in Brooklyn, I was really interested. Did you spend much time walking around? And I know you spent some time with your friend Robert Sullivan. Did I dream it that he brought you to mass somewhere?
Bob Sullivan and myself decided that we were Catholics. And
Robert, now the great writer about Brooklyn.
He's one of the great American travel writers and sort of excavators of aspects of especially the wider New York world, including traditional music, but also the landscape and various figures. But Yeah, we decided that we were. He was bringing up his kids in Brooklyn, and they were going to mass, and so I would go out on what's called Holy Saturday, just for the Easter midnight mass. It was an incredibly long ceremony, and it involved the conversion of various people at the end of it. I mean, literally the baptism of adults into the holy, into the one true church, into the Catholicism. And we got to be friends with some of the priests, and it was very nice hanging out and all that. And so that church, St. Boniface's Oratory in Brooklyn, I mean, it doesn't have a parish building, but just the church, the atmosphere in the church is certainly the atmosphere. And the walk back we would walk back through the streets of Brooklyn after midnight mass, and we would end up back at Bob's house in Clinton Street, so that I was, I was absolutely aware of that journey back, and his house, one of those high brownstone Brooklyn houses, and one of his neighbors, in fact, it was an Irish boarding house up into the 70s. And so I was in the configuration of the house, the steps up to the house, the basement, the separate door, all of that was taken from a real topography. The department store is much more Bulgers in Enniscorthy, where they had that system of hydraulic.
Yeah,
that you had a little sort of tube, and you would send it singing through the building. Yeah. And the change would come zooming back, and you could see it.
Yeah, they had one in Cleary's, in Dublin. Did Cleary's have one? Yeah.
I think Cleary's did, but so I just used basically the Bartocci's is Bulgers in Rafter Street in Enniscorthy.
Great. The great figure in Brooklyn, the great Ailish's time in Brooklyn, is Father Flood, who arranged her passage and sorted out the job and her apartment or her room in the house. He's a very, very sympathetic figure, and thinking of the late, the noughties or the 2008, 2009, I mean, there weren't many sympathetic priests in Irish fiction at all, and they were seen as and even your own short story, A Priest in the Family. I mean, and I'm just wondering, was it a conscious decision to have a good priest?
I think it was a conscious decision not to join bandwagons when you're writing a novel. Yeah. In other words, if everyone is saying this, then you've got to say, hold on a moment.
Yeah.
And if I went with that story, that would have to be the whole story of the novel.
Right.
There could be no other story. You couldn't just put it in as a side story. And it would look like a cliche no matter what you did with it, unless you gave it the full treatment. In other words, every nuance, every piece of complexity, everything that happened.
Yeah.
So therefore, from a fictional point of view, I mean, just from the point of view of trying to get the novel to concentrate on one story only, which is her story, Ailish's story, the story of her going and her coming back.
Yeah.
That if you do that, you lose the book. But also, why would you do that as a side story? Also, if you do it like that, you get much more energy from it, because you get a simple story, side story of one of those emigrant priests who was, Eamon Casey was such a priest before he became Bishop of Kerry, and he might have been better for him if he'd remained in London.
Absolutely, yeah.
Where he simply organized everyone's life, and everyone knew him as that. And they were all over England, and I just brought him to America. And I saw no reason to change that. It was never a moment where I had written a bit, where I tempted him into some other area. That didn't happen. It was always going to be like that. It didn't strike me as possible. But also, I probably was, I suppose, secretly rather pleased that I was making a character that wasn't going to be part.
Yeah.
The reader wasn't going to say, now I know what this novel is going to be about.
Yeah. No, there's enough of it all right. I was really interested in the way race is, an issue for Ailish, and it's, coming from, a very homogenous Enniscorthy, and it was very interesting the way you handled it with, put her in a position in the department store where she had to sell, nylons to women of color. And I'm just interested in the 50s in New York, especially. I mean, James Baldwin wrote his, 3 of his great books in that area, like Go Tell It to the Mountain and Native Son and Giovanni's Room. Was he in your head? Was that his, him exploding onto the literary scene and writing about color in the way? I mean, was that in the background, or was it?
I'm really not sure about the scene. As I'm not sure about the scene where she finds that she has a teacher who's teaching her law, oddly enough, in Brooklyn College, who's a Holocaust survivor. She's coming across two things that she would never have come across except in Pathy in a news in the cinema in Enniscorthy. It's coming across two real things. With the second of them, the Holocaust survivor in Wexford, someone stood up in the audience and said, I was a nurse in New York or in London in those years. Like, she was an old woman, and said, it was an amazing experience for me when I found that one person I was treating was a Holocaust survivor, had been in one of the camps. It seemed so remote from Ireland. The other one is where I realized that she's talking about this changing Brooklyn, this constantly moving Brooklyn. And of course, a new sort of nylon stock came in the 50s. It's a big year of nylon. And so after the war, nylon could be mass produced. So they're selling cheap nylon. And of course, African-American women cannot wear this, or do not want the same nylon stockings as, let's call it, white women.
Right.
And it's a different sort of color stocking. Now, once I found this out, and I have no idea how I learned it, I got interested in it, because I thought, wow, this commodity nylon then becomes sort of inflected with ideas of race. Right. And so I sent out word to all my people. Does anyone know anyone? And one famous American novelist just said, tell them to go away, but I found eventually an academic who I had known before, and she just said to a friend of mine, tell him Red Fox, just tell him 2 words, Red Fox. So I Googled Red Fox, and there it was, Red Fox, where it was the color, was the brand of nylon stocking that African-American women wore. And then I met an African-American scholar, and I'm a tremendous mansplainer. So I mansplained to him about African-American women and nylon stockings. And he said, no, you don't know anything about this. Caribbean women boiled nylon stockings in coffee. That's how that was done. Right. You put them into a saucepan and you put some coffee in and you boil them. African-American women who had more sort of, who were not Caribbean, in other words, who were darker skinned, they used Red Fox. So, and I said, like, this poured on me. What am I going to do with all this information? And what I was going to do with it was to show that Eilish would be used for this purpose in the store, because, of course, she didn't have natural American prejudices. She didn't, like, if there was an American girl, she might, from her parents, have some terrible prejudice, but Eilish didn't come with any of these. And also, it's extraordinary
the way you present her with as an utter innocence. I mean, utter innocent, should I say, which is really important.
Yeah,
it's like everything is new.
Yeah, she's just not. This is another aspect of things. She doesn't have that sort of. Yeah, she doesn't have any problem with that at all, really. And I thought it'd be an interesting scene in the book.
Yeah, great. Can we go back to Father Flood and this amazing of what you were saying about Eamon Casey earlier on, and these great men who just looked after everyone in the community. And I thought if we could get a taste of that, also for the season that's in it, that great Christmas scene in the book.
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems with the book was becoming, this is, on page, say, just coming up to page 100, that it was becoming too intimate, too domestic, too much about the rooms, and I needed to bring it out into a bigger moment, but I didn't know how to do that. So I thought that the idea of all these men would come here to this place in Brooklyn on Christmas Day. All the men who hadn't made it in America, who built the bridges and the tunnels, but actually hadn't ever made it in any way. So this is Christmas Day in Brooklyn. For the next 2 hours, Eilish was busy piling food on the plates, carrying them out 2 at a time. Father Flood carved turkeys and hams as they arrived, piling stuffing and roast potatoes into bowls. There were 2 women called Miss Murphy, both Miss Murphy helping. For a while, one Miss Murphy devoted herself entirely to washing up and drying and cleaning and clearing the space, as her sister and Eilish served the men, making sure to leave nothing out: turkey, ham, stuffing, roast potatoes, and Brussels sprouts, and making sure in their haste not to give anyone too much or too little. There's plenty of food now, so don't worry, Father Flood said, shouted, but no more than 3 potatoes ahead, and go easy on the stuffing. When they had enough meat carved, he went outside and busied himself opening bottles of stout. At first, the men seemed shabby to Eilish, and she noticed body odours from a good number of them. As they sat down and drank their stout, waiting for the soup or the food, she could not believe there were so many of them, some of them so poor-looking and so old. but even the younger ones had bad teeth and appeared worn down. Many were still smoking, even as the soup came. She did her best to be polite to them. She observed a change in them soon, however, as they began to talk to each other, or shout greetings down the table, or enter into low, intense conversations. At first, they reminded her of men who had sat on the bridge in Enniscorthy. But the time she served them and they turned to thank her, they seemed more like her father and her brothers in the way they spoke or smiled, the toughness in their faces softened by shyness. What had appeared stubborn or hard, now strangely tender. As she served the man she thought was her father, she looked at him carefully, amazed at how little he actually resembled him, as though it had been a trick of the light or something she'd completely imagined.
That's great. It's a wonderful scene, and I think it was captured really beautifully in the film as well. I mean, that was the one we'll get back to the film.
I think it's one of those scenes that can lend itself to that sort of treatment where the cinematographer, everyone has to sort of to get out of rooms into space.
Yeah.
And the thing with the film as well, I wanted Iarla or Linard. I think it was my only contribution to art, really, was to say to John Crowley, could you just get Iarla? If you get Iarla, it'll all be right. Yeah. We went off to see Iarla, and Iarla agreed to do it, which was tremendous.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, it was great. We might go back to the film towards the end, but Eilish has to return because her gorgeous sister Rose dies of this heart condition, and it's really interesting that she comes back as a not a completely different person, but all of the innocence is gone, and like you wouldn't say she hasn't got a sour look about the town, but she really is much more cynical. But like she's watching everything in a way that she didn't watch before, and she's taking everything in, and every little. I know the Mrs. Kelly, the snobby shopkeeper. I mean, I know that they found her ridiculous, but there was a wonderful air of knowing and some cynicism about her when she comes back. And was that something you really wanted to look at? I mean, and you spoke earlier on about these people that come back and you know, they kind of haven't a clue, but I mean, she really has a kind of a beady eye, which she developed in America.
Yeah, I mean, the problem for people who came back just for the summer or for a week was that no one had the slightest interest in them. And they were delighted they were back in theory, but in practice, it was really hard to know what to say to them or do. So they, I found, for example, when I went to live in Barcelona and I came back eventually, and I thought maybe, you know, just at home, people would say, well, like, was that true also in Barcelona? And I realized that actually no one wanted to know anything about it. People wanted to tell you the smallest thing that had happened locally. And you learned to listen to that. So that Eilish comes home and finds her mother is writing. People have written sympathy cards or sympathy letters to her mother. Her mother is replying to each one. And Eilish is saying, like, have you nothing else to, like, is this? And if they write back to you, what will you do? And the mother says, well, I'll write back to them. And so Eilish just thinks this is sort of awful stuff. And she there's a moment where she's going out with her friend Nancy and realizes their two guys are bringing them to Courtown and they're from the rugby club. And Eilish just says, are you guys still wearing those awful blazers and that hair oil? You know, like there's a sense of her, like, I'm not back here to actually listen to telling me how great the rugby club guys are. Like, it's just not going to happen. And so that she's also, she's got a sort of way of moving. Oddly enough, in the 3 years, something has happened to her. She's just been away, but she's been in America. So she has just the dress she's wearing is a sort of cotton that no one has seen in Ireland. It's brighter, and just the way she can move along the street. I think in the movie she's got sunglasses. I'm not sure I gave her sunglasses in the book.
Yeah, there's no sunglasses in the book actually.
A bit too much, I thought. But
there's the American togs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this might seem like a very small thing to people, but when I went to Spain on the beach in, say, the Mediterranean, the idea of changing into your togs on the beach in that twisty way Irish men do, like trying to pull down your underpants and get up your togs. Like, Spanish guys just wouldn't do that. They would change their togs at home because their togs will dry easily. And women, of course, wouldn't like the idea of doing all that stuff with towels. So that was the first big thing I noticed about it was different from Ireland to Spain, was that on the beach, people just wouldn't ever And
it's a
you know,
practical thing rather than a modesty thing. It's just,
no, it wasn't. Oh, it wasn't to do with modesty. It was you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
But of course, when they see Eilish doing it, they just think when she comes home, they think it's the most. Nancy especially thinks it's the like. Why did we never think of this in all the centuries? You know?
Yeah, amazing. And what's your kind of exploration of the mother-daughter relationship, where there's a real sense of you're home now and you're mine, and you know you will do what I need you to do, and you've been away too long. I mean, there's a real cruelty about her mother in a way, which you can completely understand. But it's very interesting that you did that you presented the mother in that kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, the mother's going to lose her,
Mm.
and you know, she goes back to America. The mother's probably never going to see her again.
Mm.
And I had just to think about that. Like, just a beautiful daughter in her early 20s. She's just gone.
Mm-hmm.
And but there is a moment where the mother says to her, you know, is he nice? But the fellow in America, and he says, yeah. And the mother says, well, he'd have to be nice if you married him. You know, that I was trying to keep it so there wasn't just like attack. It was, and the mother just then goes to bed. But I mean, so she doesn't see her off in the morning. But nonetheless, I didn't want it to be only about being, I suppose, cruel or too possessive. That it went, you know, it worked both ways. But the mother does want her to marry in the town and stay in the town. So when Jim comes along, you almost can see that from the mother's point of view, which is, I mean, I suppose something that you do see very much in Jane Austen, where, you know, when Mr. Bingley arrives, and the idea that the second sister, we're not doing well on these sisters' names, but I think she's called Catherine.
You need Stephen Fry for that.
What?
You need Stephen Fry for that. He'd be all over
this. We really do need somebody really who knows these things. But anyway, when, you know, the second sister gets with Mr. Bingley, Mrs. Bennet, the mother, comes to, she just cannot be stopped on the subject of how great this marriage would be, to everyone's huge embarrassment. So I was taking a whole lot of things like that from especially from Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, great. Could we have another blast of the? There's that great piece where they go to Cush, that secret beach.
Can you give me the page number for that?
Yeah, it's 220 in this edition.
Great, thanks very much. No, I just had it marked and then I didn't. And can you give me the opening line of it?
On Sunday, just after lunch.
Thanks very much. It will just take me a second. Sorry. Let me see. Did you say 220?
Yeah. Can you? 220 in this edition. On Sunday, just after lunch, with the weather still warm, George and Nancy and Jim pulled up in their house.
Oh yeah. Sorry. I've got a paragraph in the post office. At lunchtime.
No, that's what.
Sorry about this now.
Don't worry. It's probably 222 in your edition. Are you a page ahead?
Yeah, it seems to be. But when George had parked the car, sorry, I had it marked and I pulled it up.
George said Kirklow might be too crowded and thought they should go to Cush Gap instead.
Okay.
Once George, so actually, just to see, once they'd parked the car, so it's 3 paragraphs before that, on Sunday just after lunch.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, at lunchtime.
Oh, it's different. Yeah, it says on Sunday just after lunch, with the weather still warm, George and Nancy and Jim pulled up in front of her house.
That's funny, isn't it? Oh, right.
Jim held the back door of the car open for her while she got in. He had a white shirt on with the sleeves.
That's funny.
Don't say. Do you have George said that Kirklow might be too crowded?
In the post office for the next few days, she moved around the town. At lunchtime, nodded coldly at Jim. When George had parked the car, Jim had turned about a towel. Oh, that's funny.
Well, have you got the piece of going to Cush there in your edition?
Nope, that's funny. Don't
worry. We'll do that one.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Don't worry.
Okay.
Can we talk about the film and just about the whole thing? I mean, just tell us
if the money had been there at the beginning, when everything was in place, then Saoirse Ronan was not old enough,
right? And
so it required 2 years or a bit more to go by, which it did go by, and it just looked as though the film wasn't going to be made because money couldn't be raised, and the idea of a novel about an Irish woman going to America, didn't particularly interest people in London who had, didn't think this was a great story. And so that was all fine. And then Saoirse got to be old enough, and Saoirse was looking for an Irish script because she had not played an Irish woman. She'd done everything else. I mean, she'd done In Atonement to the Lovely Bones in those films. And so she was ready to do this. So it was an interesting group because it was produced by Finola Dwyer, who was whose parents had gone to New Zealand from Ireland in the same year as Eilish Goes to America. And Finola was living in London, and here she was sort of back in Ireland. So that trajectory. Saoirse's parents' trajectory had also been to go to New York and then come back to Ireland. John Crowley was from Cork and living in London. And the only person who hadn't been through all this was Nick Hornby, who wrote the screenplay. And but there was a sense that there was, for us involved in this, there was a great deal at stake. And so we just wanted to get this right, or at least I felt they wanted to get it right.
Yeah.
And there were some very funny things where John Crowley went to Enniscorthy and saw that it hadn't changed very much, so he could film the film there. When the film was actually made, they wanted to show it, but there's no cinema in Enniscorthy anymore. Wow. So they wanted to show it in Wexford, and I said that won't work. People won't go to that. It's a different town. And so they did up the ballroom of the hotel in Enniscorthy, and everybody, there were 2 showings, but I have to say that people realized it was an opening, and they dressed up. I mean, men in black tie, and women in full fig, which wasn't on the invite, but people just presumed it was like an Oscar night, and people looked amazing. But there was an amazing moment at the beginning when Eilish comes out the door, and so that's a street that I would have remembered. I would have walked every day.
Right.
I reimagined it for the book. Nick Hornby put it into the screenplay. John Crowley saw that street would work in the film. He filmed it, and here we were, just 2 streets away, watching it now. So there was a funny business of that. You don't often get the streets of your own town in a film, because that's not the way Ireland is. And So
and how was the process in terms of writing with Nick? I mean, were you involved at all? You didn't do that.
I didn't have an email address for him. I didn't have a phone number for him. I had met him a few times, just in the way you can at sort of this sort of literary party, and that's Nick Hornby or something. But I know I didn't know him, and I didn't talk to him.
And did he go to Enniscorthy? Did he go to Enniscorthy?
No. And he just wrote the screenplay, and he did draft after draft of it. I mean, it wasn't like just quick work or anything. 6 months later, Nick would be writing it again, and trying to find a line of sort of narrative line in it. And when it was all done, he sent it to me, or the producer sent it to me, and I read it. And there were just a few tiny things to do with Irish speech.
Yeah.
And I met him in London, basically just to thank him for doing it. In other words, he really. And there was nothing he had changed in it that offended me in any way, really. I mean, I everything he did, I understood.
Right.
He left out her going to Liverpool on her way to America because it just gets in the way of the story. Everything made sense. And so that was, there was no downside I mean, I think writers, novel writers, really like talking about what an awful time they had with that awful producer, and like it's a great story about my sacred art was destroyed by Humphrey Bogart or somebody, but that didn't happen to me.
Yeah, great. Well, I think we've come to the end, so I just want to say thanks a million, Colm.
Thank you very much,
everyone, for watching questions. Also want to say special thanks to the festival tech guru, Liam Mulvaney, who danced me through tonight's tech brilliantly, and to remind everyone that the next book club will be on 7 p.m. on the January the 11th at Anne Enright. And on behalf of everyone at the festival, have a great Christmas and a very happy 2024.